Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whichever location you are watching this video, and welcome to QuestPoints channel. And today what are we doing? Today we are going to go and cover 25 important architecture interview questions, 25 important questions around software architecture. So in these 2 hours, we'll be talking about how to explain the project architecture. We'll be talking about architecture style, architecture pattern, design pattern, structural, behavioral, creational. We'll discuss some questions around Singleton pattern, MVC, MVP, MVVM, layered architecture, tiered architecture, and many other things, right? Disclaimer, khabardar, khabardar, khabardar. Please note, by just watching my videos, you are not going to become an architect. You are not going to go and crack architect interviews, right? It is very important that you should have experience. You should have led your team technically. You should have solved some complex POCs. You do understand design patterns. You do understand architecture pattern. Then you will say, sir, फिर ये video क्या है? What is this video all about? This video is a revision video. See, what happens is, as a senior, when you're working in a company, you're not always doing architecting jobs, right? Many of the time we'll go in sending emails, doing coordination, talking with the team, right? And some time also goes into politics, right? So what happens is the whole 8 hours you are doing a work, you are doing a job, you're not learning. But when you go for an interview, right, there are questions which comes up, so a quick revision is needed. And this video will help you to revise quickly. So that's a disclaimer which you need to understand. Okay guys, now very quickly, I would like that if you guys can participate in 2 or 3 things, right? In this whole video, if you can do some participation, that would help the community, that would help me also for my further syllabus. First thing, I'm sure that you're going for architect interviews, you have been asked architecture questions, right? So if you can go and put down in the comments below saying that I was asked this question, I answered like this and this happened, right? That would not only help the community, but also we are recording further videos in the syllabus. I will try to include them, right? Second thing is, I'm a teacher, right? At the end of the day, I want to know that are students really enjoying my lessons, right? Am I fruitful, isn't it? So in this 2 hours of video, let us say that if you are on the 20th minute, or let us say if you are on the 50th minute, if you can just put down out there and say that, okay, I am on the 50th minute and I have completed till here. This will help me to analyze that how many people have completed my tutorial and till what level, right? And third important thing is, I'm giving you a gift. At the last part of this video, there is a beautiful gift out there. And I would want that you should watch the complete video and check out for the gift, right? Okay guys, so let us get started. And here is the syllabus, 25 questions. I'm flashing on the screen. You can see right out there, I'm scrolling, all the 25 questions, which is going to go and cover the basic questions, MVC, MVP, MVVM, Singleton pattern, and then all the other questions what you're seeing on the screen, right? So let us get started with the first question. So let us start with some candidate-driven interview question. So what exactly is a candidate-driven interview question? A candidate-driven interview question is a question, when you answer that question, depending on your answer, the interviewer can ask you connected questions, or let me use that word, over here, you can provoke the interviewer to ask questions accordingly. For example, if the interviewer asks you, which design pattern have you used in your project? And you say that I have used Singleton pattern, I have used repository pattern, I have used CQRS, right? It is very much possible that the interviewer can ask you questions around these 3 patterns. Now, why is it important to identify candidate-driven interview question? It is important to identify candidate-driven interview question because it will help you to control the interview. Think about it. If you can provoke the interviewer to ask you questions, and that questions which you are good in, you are actually trying to bring the interviewer in your area, and that will make your interview easy and you can easily crack the interview, right? So it is important to identify candidate-driven interview question, and this first question is a candidate-driven interview question. So let us start with it. Okay, so this is a banking project, very good project, right? So can you explain this architecture of this project, the current project?
Sir, MVC.
Yeah, but I don't want a 3-letter word, right? I can see that it's a very big project out here. So can you try to elaborate a little bit more?
Model view controller.
Okay. You are going for an architect interview. You are a senior. If you are going to go and answer, such kind of one-liners like MVC and 3-layer and MVVM, it's not going to work. Remember, you are asking for a bigger salary. So your answer should be elegant. Your answer should show off your knowledge. Your answer should be a knowledge, which shows seniority, which shows authority, right? So if I were to answer this question, I would go in such a way. So what I would do over here is that I would actually glide from the 50,000 feet level to the 30,000 feet level to the 10,000 feet level. Means what, right? So first, from the 50,000 feet level, I'll talk about the different layers I've used in my project. For example, I will say that so we had like the UI layer, which was made in Angular or React, whatever is your framework you have used. Second, we had a MVC layer, which is your middle layer. Then we had the SQL Server database, and then we had a cloud in case if you're using hosting cloud, or in case you have some common layer you want to discuss, and so on. So first, talk about the different pieces and the layers in your project, right? After that, you can go inside those layers, the 30,000 feet level. You can go and say, okay, inside the ASP.NET, I had used MVC. We had the model, we had the view, we had the controller. So the view had the look and feel, it had the positioning, the controller was the binding thing which binds the model and the view, and the model had the business logic. So now you are going to the next level, the 30,000 feet level. Then what you can do is that you can more glide down and go to the 10,000 feet level and talk about the different patterns you have used. So you can say that, okay, so for connecting to the database, we have used a repository pattern. To do transactions, we have used unit of work. Or for example, to centralize object creation, you have used factory pattern. Or, for example, for caching and etc., you have used singleton pattern. So you can then go to the patterns out there. Remember that whenever you are discussing your architecture, also talk about security. If you have used OpenID, or if you have used OAuth or OpenID Connect, right? So start from the layers, go to the architecture patterns, and then talk about the design pattern. Remember, this is an architect interview. It's a senior interview. Your salary is a higher end salary. So your answer should show that credibility, right? So let me try to answer this now that I've told you the way I will answer it. So this is how my answer will be. Remember that my answer cannot be your answer. You should have your own answer in your mind, because your project is different, your architecture is different, right? So this is my answer, but I'll say that. So my project actually consisted of 4 or 5 layers. The first one was the UI layer, which had Angular. Then we had the MVC layer, the ASP.NET layer, where my server components were there. And then we had SQL Server. And also we had a lot of common components. So there was also a common layer, right? And also, we had used MVC pattern, right? So we were following ASP.NET. We had used the basic model view controller pattern, wherein the model had the business logic, the view had the look and feel, the controller was binding both of them. Also, we had used different design patterns as well. For example, repository pattern, using entity framework, I was connecting to SQL Server for caching and for caching and the global objects, we have used singleton pattern, and also dependency injection and factory pattern also we have used, right? And overall, for security, we had OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0, for which I had used Azure Active Directory. So the point is that your answer should be detailed, polished, and it should show that elegancy. So MVC, so when we talk about MVC, it's a design pattern. Is it a design pattern? I think it's a design pattern. And what about dependency injection? Dependency injection, I think dependency injection, it's an architecture style. What about REST? REST is an architecture pattern. What about factory pattern? I think factory pattern, I think, is architecture pattern. I think so. Okay. So we all try to do this, isn't it? We all try to guess sometimes. Sometimes when we don't know the answer, right, we try to guess the answer, isn't it? But remember that when you try to guess the answer, what happens is, it can build a mistrust with the interviewer. And specifically at the senior level, this trust is so important. This is such an important factor out there, because they think that, okay, we are hiring a senior, so he should not only be technically competent, but we can trust him. We can trust his solution, because he's going to go and lead a group of people out there, right? So I would suggest that, when you don't know an answer, what you should do is you should try to diplomatically move away, saying that, I need to look into it, or I will check out, what it is. And then you can say, okay, like must be, at this moment, I'm not clear about it, right? but I do understand MVC. I know that there is a controller view and model. I do understand REST, that REST, is there for network solution where you talk in terms of resources, statefulness, statelessness, and so on. So what you can do is that you can try to diplomatically move away from it, but see that you don't try to guess answers, don't try to give wrong answers, right? If you try to give wrong answers, wrong vocabulary, it will build, mistrust, and that can be very bad, right? So the whole interview can go good, and there you are, with that one mistrust, right? With that one thing, the whole interview can collapse, right? So let us now go ahead and try to get the answer right, what it is. So architecture style is at the 50,000 feet level. I'm so sorry. Yeah. In between, I will be trying to give you some non-technical guidance also, right? Or some non-technical things also. So don't feel bad about it. Definitely this video, I want it to be a pure technical video, but interview is not just about technical things, right? It is also about non-technical things, right? So sorry to little bit deviate away from the answer. Okay, so first thing, if you look at architecture style, it is at the 50,000 feet level, while architecture pattern goes little bit down and talks at the structure level, and design pattern talks at the solution level, at the code level. It talks about a specific context, right? Let us try to understand. So architecture style, some examples of architecture style are REST. REST is architectural style. SOA is architectural style. So in case of an architecture style, there are just guidelines and principle. For example, we say, okay, REST is an architecture style which defines, how network application should work, right? How networking or how two things can communicate with each other in network, right? So in that case, REST says that it should be stateless. REST says that we should think in terms of resources. REST says that we should have uniform interfaces like post, get, put, delete, or whatever, right? So REST, talks about just guidelines and principles, right? So that is what is termed as architecture style. It just talks about that how your solution should be shaping up, right? So it just talks about the principles and guidelines. While in case of an architecture pattern, it goes at a structure level. It goes, at least you will see a block diagram out there. So you can see like MVC is an architecture pattern, right? MVVM is an architecture pattern. MVP is an architecture pattern, right? A layered architecture, when you say 3-layer architecture, that is again an architecture pattern. So in case of an architecture pattern, we know, okay, there is going to be a controller. We know that there is going to be a view, and we know there is going to be a model, right? Now this view, it is built by using HTML, or it is built by using a mobile. This model is a class or a function, it does not matter. This controller is what it does. So like for example, in case of ASP.NET, we use the ASP.NET MVC to implement MVC, right? In the same way, you can use something else to implement MVC, right? So in case of an architecture pattern, he does not talk about that how this will be implemented, or how the code would be, right? He does not talk at the code level. It just talks at the broader level, at the block diagram level. It just defines the overall structure, right? So that is the architecture pattern. Design pattern is very, very specific, right? It has a very specific context. I can even go one step ahead and say that in design pattern, the code is also very clear. For example, some examples of design patterns are factory pattern, your iterator pattern, right? Your singleton pattern, non-GOF, means if you look at the non-GOF patterns, are like repository pattern, unit of work, CQRS, so these are some of the patterns. So in case of a design pattern, what I've seen is, things are very clear. Even at the code level, things are clear, or they are in sync, so you write either in Java or you write either in C#. Even the code also looks very same. For example, if you look at singleton pattern, we'll say, okay, it should have a private constructor, right? Isn't it? It should have a static keyword. So a lot of things are clear at the code level. And second, the context is very clear. So why are we implementing singleton pattern? Because we need some common sharing of data. We need a global object, right? Why are you implementing factory pattern? To do decoupling. We want to centralize the object creation. So why are you implementing repository pattern? So that we can have an abstraction over the data source. So there is a specific context, when it comes to design pattern, right? So architecture style. So let us try to revise. Architecture style just defines the guidelines and principles. Architecture pattern defines the block level, but it does not talk at the code level. It is not very specific. It is not at a context level. While design pattern, has a very, very specific context, and you also know, almost that what the code can be, right? Before we move to question number 3, here's a small question, or I will rather say, let us have a small discussion on these 3 things. So these 3 things, that is dependency injection, dependency inversion, and inversion of control. What do you think? These 3 things are design pattern, architecture pattern, or architecture style? Please note, dependency injection and dependency inversion are 2 different things. They are not same. So go ahead, comment below, let us collaborate and let us discuss that these 3 things are architecture pattern, architecture style, or design pattern. No architecture interview is complete without questions on design pattern. So let us start with some basic questions of design pattern, and let us then go towards the advanced ones, right? So let us first start with what are design pattern. Design pattern are time tested solutions for recurring architecture problems. Remember that design pattern does not solve all the problems of software development. It's only around the architecture they solve the problem, and they are time tested for recurring problems, for recurring issues, right? So in case of a design pattern, you have a problem and then you have a solution for it, right? Now whenever you're answering these questions, right, as a senior, please try to use vocabularies which are known in the industry. For example, you can see these words like time tested, recurring, right? These are some of the vocabularies where the interviewer is looking from a senior. Okay, so time tested solution from recurring architecture problems. And when you're answering this question, right, please try to qualify it with some examples of design pattern. For example, you can see over here, you can say something like this, it is a time tested solution for recurring architecture problems. So some of the examples are, for example, adapter pattern. If we have incompatible interfaces, adapter pattern solves that. For example, if you want to go and iterate over an object sequentially without exposing the underlined representation. Underlined representation means internally you don't want to know it's a dictionary, internally you don't want to know it's a list or an array, right? So iterator pattern, what it does is it actually helps you to browse sequentially without exposing the underlined representation. Template pattern, so you have a problem where you have a fixed skeleton, right, skeleton of algorithm in a parent class, and you want that for specific steps the subclass should override it. Template pattern. Repository pattern, it helps you to actually provides a separation between the application logic and data access code, right? So it helps you to abstract and centralize the data access logic in an application, and by doing so you can make the code more modular, more maintainable and testable, right? So make sure that when you are answering this question, qualify it with some examples, right? And there are 3 important things to remember whenever you are giving these examples, right? First thing, point number 1, just try to avoid singleton pattern. I'm not saying that don't say singleton pattern, but if you want to stand out in the crowd, then don't use singleton pattern as an example, because that every developer actually uses this example in interviews, right? Second, do not just stick to GOF patterns, means do not just stick to Gang of 4 patterns. Try to give some non-GOF examples like repository pattern, unit of work, CQRS, right? So these are some of the non-GOF patterns. Why? Because if you see the new era, right, of microservices and DDD, there are many new design patterns which have come in, and any interviewer would like to hear about it, right? And most important, right, whatever patterns you mention out here, you should be very confident about it, right? So this part of the answer, it depends on you as a candidate, that what you want to answer. So if you think, no, like more than adapter pattern, I understand factory pattern, then replace this, right? So answering this question holistically, this is how I'll answer it. Design patterns are time tested solutions for recurring architecture problems, and some of the examples are, for example, if you have incompatible interfaces, then adapter pattern comes to help. For example, you want to loop through a collection without knowing what is the type of collection internally, iterator pattern. If you want to go and abstract and centralize the data access logic at one place, right, repository pattern. What are the different types of design patterns? So primarily there are 3 categories of design patterns. One is a creational category, second one is a behavioral category, and the third one is a structural category. So creational pattern, category actually talks about issues around object creation. So for example, if you say you want to create a single instance of an object, right, then you have singleton pattern. Let us say you have an object and you want to create a copy of it, you want to create a clone of it, prototype pattern, right? Remember that I've just given some examples out here. There are many more patterns in creational, but for this question I've just given 2-3 examples which I am very comfortable talking, right? Second one is behavioral. In case of behavioral, the focus is around communication between objects. For example, let us say that you have too many objects who are talking with each other, and because of that, things can become chatty. So you have mediator. It simplifies the communication between the classes. Let us say that you have an object and you want to capture the internal state of the object, like old values and new values, memento. Let us say that you want to create like a workflow, one object, doing some task and then passing to the other object, and then the other object, chain of objects. Then you have chain of responsibility, right? So this is around the what you call architecture issues or design issues around objects communication. Then we have structural, which talks about the object composition and structure. So more related around the structure. So let us say you have two classes and they have incompatible interfaces, adapter. Let us say you want to create a composite object. Means you have how do you say it? Let us say that you have a circle. Inside the circle you have a rectangle. Inside the rectangle you again have a circle, right? Then you have a composite object. Decorator, you want to add behavioral dynamically. So these are the 3 different types of categories. Now please note that these categories have come from Gang of 4. So really, if you ask me personally, in today's world, these categories don't actually, as an architect, it does not mind to me too much, because new design patterns have been introduced, like repository pattern, CQRS, aggregate root, right? And some of these patterns, it is very difficult to put them into one of these classifications, frankly, right? So, but yes, from the interview perspective, remember these 3, and whenever you are answering, give examples around it, because once you give examples, right, that sends a message to the interviewer saying that yes, this guy understands design pattern, and whatever examples you give, you should be very sure of those examples, right? So just revising, there are 3 different categories of design pattern: creational, which talks about the object creation issues, right, which solves problem around the object creation issues like prototype and singleton; behavioral, which talks about the communication between objects like chain of responsibilities, memento and mediator; structural, which talks about the object composition and the structural issues like mismatching of interfaces, adapter pattern; composite objects, composite pattern, right, if you want to have composed objects; and if you want to add responsibilities dynamically, decorator pattern. So which design pattern have you used in a project? Or I will rather say that what are the different design patterns you are aware of?
Singleton.
Only singleton? Any other patterns?
Singleton pattern.
Yeah, that is right, but see, at the end of the day, when you talk about a project, right, a project does not work on one design pattern, right? It needs multiple design patterns. So if you can add something more.
So singleton.
Okay. This happens with most of the developers. Most of the developers love this singleton pattern. I don't know. There are so many patterns out there, but this pattern for some reason is talked, or I will say over talked in interviews. So let me give you 4 suggestions, of how to answer this question. Point number 1, do not answer singleton. Remember, it's a senior interview. Stand outside the crowd, stand away from the crowd, and you should look distinct. That's the first point. The second point is that I would suggest that do not just talk about GOF patterns, right? Talk about non-GOF patterns also, like repository and unit of work and aggregate root, event sourcing. There are so many other design patterns, which have currently emerged. Keep those also in mind, right? The third point, what I would like to say out here is that only talk about those patterns which you are confident. And how you can do that? If you see any project, whatever you have worked, right, I'm sure that you must have used at least 10-15 patterns unknowingly, right? So go and have a closer look at your projects, see those patterns, understand it, and talk about them. Talk about those only in the interview. What happens with that? You not only talk confidently, but you also talk naturally. That word naturally is very important. And when you start speaking naturally in an interview, specifically in an architect interview, Believe me, interviewer loves it. An architect interview, a senior level interview, should not be just Q&A. It should go into a conversation mode, right? In a conversation mode where both the interviewer as well as the interviewee, right? Both of them learn something, right? So that's the third point. And the fourth important point, I'm going to go and cover 10 patterns out here, which I feel that, people use in their projects. But remember that my patterns cannot be your patterns, right? So please see your project closely and come out with some of those patterns, which you are confident on, right? But let us here now talk about 10 patterns, at least, which I will now definitely in the interview, you don't have so much time to talk about 10 patterns, but I will give 10 patterns. Must be you can remember 3-4 from it confidently, right? And that would help you to answer this question. So the first pattern which comes to my mind is repository pattern. Why repository pattern? Because if you see, right, most of the applications, what we see around are CRUD applications. That means interacting with database, insert, update, and delete, and so on, right? So this repository pattern, what it does is it actually acts like an abstract layer between the model and the data access technology. So you have a model which has the business logic, right? And then you have data access technology like entity framework or ADO.NET or whatever, right? So this repository pattern can stand in between, right, and act like a mediator, okay? And so in this repository pattern, you can put, you can centralize, I will say, common code, of data access, right? And with that, it will help you to make it more maintainable, more testable, more modular, and so on, right? So first pattern which comes to my mind is repository pattern. The second pattern which goes hands in glove with repository pattern is unit of work. So repository pattern acts like a mediator, right? And unit of work actually helps you to manage transactions between the repository pattern objects. So for example, let us say you have customer and customer has addresses. So you would like to say that, okay, if all the addresses gets inserted, the customer will get inserted. In other words, if there is a failure in inserting of the customer or the address, everything has to revert back. So either all the address get persisted or everything rolls back, right? So for such kind of a thing, unit of work is used inside repository pattern actually, right? So that is there. The third pattern which comes to my mind is iterator pattern. We all do for each loop, right? So iterator pattern, what it does, it helps you to go ahead and it helps you to iterate over an aggregate object sequentially, right? Without exposing the underlying representation. So at the back end, you don't know, you are iterating over a list, you are iterating over a collection, you are iterating over a dictionary, right? So that's what iterator pattern does. And one very important point, when you're discussing about iterator pattern, please note in .NET, right, and also in Java, IEnumerator and IEnumerable, is already there to implement iterator pattern. So we don't really have to go ahead and write a wrapper class above it, right? So in the interview, if you can just say that you are using IEnumerable and IEnumerator, right, that itself is the implementation of an iterator pattern. The fourth pattern which comes to my mind is factory pattern, a creational pattern, wherein the object creation is centralized, right, and the instance of the creation goes to the derived classes. So this is again the fourth one, right? The fifth one which comes to my mind is specifically when you have incompatible interfaces, adapter pattern, right? So especially around third-party components. So you have two classes and both the classes have incompatible interfaces, and if you want to make them compatible, that's where adapter pattern comes into picture. Specifically in case of a third party, right? Third party components, those methods you can't change of the third party, right? And then you have your own classes internally and the methods are not compatible with each other. Then you put an adapter in between and you make the interfaces compatible. The sixth one is decorator pattern. So you have an object and you want to add a behavior dynamically. For example, let us say you have a validator object and it is doing just required check. And you want to say, okay, now I want to go and do a null check also, or also I want to go and do a range number check, right? So you can add a behavior and remove a behavior dynamically, right? The seventh one is the command pattern. With CQRS coming into picture, we'll talk about CQRS in the later videos. If you look at CQRS, right, this command pattern, the base of CQRS is command pattern, okay? Specifically, if you're doing MVVM also, there also you will see I command. Whenever you see that I command, it is one of the signs, saying that implement command pattern. Right? In command pattern, what happens is you treat a command as a class or object. Okay. So for example, till now, you must be thinking that, okay, what can be an object? An object can be a person, it can be a car, it can be a
printer, it can be customer, it can be supplier. But if I say that command can be create, command can be update, command can be fire, command can be throw a bomb, right? Okay, just thinking away. So at that time, you treat, for such kind of scenario, you treat a command as a class. Okay, so this is the command pattern. You will find heavy use in CQRS. Facade pattern, again, I find this very useful. For example, at the backend, you have lot of things, let's say you are doing accounting. So in case of an accounting, you do a debit, you do a credit, you do a voucher posting, but you want to represent this system in a very simplified way through a web API, or must be through a REST service, or through a WCF service or something, right? That's where facade pattern comes into use. It represents a subsystem in a simplified way. Ninth one is composite. Composite means where you have object composed of each other. Okay. So for example, let us say you have a square has a circle has a square. Okay. Or another example, where I use composite pattern is menu. A menu has a sub menu again has a menu, right? A composite pattern. Then 10th, which I feel, I have been using a lot, is the template pattern or template method. In template method, what happens is the steps are fixed, like extraction, transformation, and loading, right? The steps are fixed, but the individual steps can be overridden in the child classes, right? So the steps of the algorithms are fixed, right? But the subclass can go and override the individual algorithm of the steps, right? So these are the 10 patterns which I can think about, right? And remember, as I've said, my patterns cannot be your patterns, right? I will be having 2-3 videos, separate videos dedicated to each one of these patterns. Okay, but for now, in this first video, I really don't want to go in depth into each one of these patterns, because we have to see the code, we have to understand it. See, until we don't see the code, right, you won't be able to speak in the interview. Please understand it, right? So either you can go and you can see my design pattern videos, right? There's a design pattern, lengthy lecture of design pattern with the project. You can see that. If not, right, what I'll be doing is in the second lecture or the third chapter, 3-4 chapters, I will dedicate to these 10 patterns at least, right? So that you are able to answer in a more confident way. But for now, you can choose your 3 or 4. Remember, as I've said, if you just look at your project, I'm very sure you must be using repository pattern. I'm very sure you must be doing a for each loop, right? Iterator pattern is almost there. I'm very, very sure that you must be exposing a web API where you don't know you have used facade, but you're exposing the subsystem in a simplified way, right? I'm sure that you must be creating a menu and a sub menu, where something is contained inside each other, right? So go and see your project. I'm sure that you will find many of these patterns you have implemented unknowingly, and if you speak that in the interview also, it will send a different level of confidence, right?
Now, before I move to question number 6, I would like to ask all our developer friends out here, for this question which is flashed on the screen, how many of you guys have answered singleton pattern? I can see the smile on your face. If you're smiling out there, right, yes, I answer always singleton pattern, then please put a smiley down below in the YouTube comments. But here it is, quickly about singleton pattern. Not only, this pattern is favorite between the candidates, while answering the question, but even the interviewers love it, right? So with all respect, for this pattern, the next coming up 4 or 5 questions are on singleton pattern. So let us get started.
Singleton pattern helps to create a single instance of an object, right? So if you want to create a single instance, and if you want that single instance to be shared across your application while it is running, singleton pattern is useful. Now there are some use cases of singleton pattern, right? First one is, which I have been using in my project, is for caching purpose. For example, now let us say you have country master, you have state masters, you have currency masters, then what you can do is that you can create one single object of it, one single collection of it, and use the same collection again and again, and you don't have to make a trip to SQL Server or to your RDBMS again and again. Second use of singleton pattern which I have seen is for common data sharing. For example, you have a common theme which you want to share when your application is running. You have some configuration data, which you want to share when the application is running. Then singleton pattern again is useful. When such kind of question comes up, right, it is very, very essential to show your knowledge of, to show your authority of. So don't just answer in one liner, private constructor and static keyword, right? Try to stand out from the crowd, right? So here it is. At least I feel there are 5 or 6 important steps, which you should be mentioning when you're talking about singleton pattern. So here it is. Step 1. Now the first thing is, I think we should have one separate wrapper class. So for example, in this case, we are trying to load the country master for caching. So you can see there is a list of countries, you can have list of states, you can have list of currencies, right? So whatever are those singleton objects, right, they will be wrapped inside a separate class called as singleton. That's the first thing. And second, the access to these objects, will be provided from an instance within. So that means that this singleton class instance will be created inside the class itself. This is called as a whole part relationship, right? So you can see here, this is a singleton class and the instance is created internally, right? So any access to the countries collection, etc., will happen through the instance. So that's the first thing I think which you should talk about, that there should be a separate singleton class. The second one is, when you talk about singleton, multiple threads can access it, it can be accessed from multiple places. So definitely, there should be a thread safety. So for thread safety, you can see we have created a lock object, and every time we load an instance, or every time we go ahead and load an asset like a countries or a state, right, whatever it is, right, we always go and lock that object. So you can see this is the second thing which should come out, that thread safety should be taken into account by using lock, by using mutex, whatever way you think is good, right? The third one is, this singleton class, nobody should be able to create an instance of it. So that's why you can see that there is a private constructor inside it, right? So this is the third thing. The fourth thing is, there should be lazy loading or eager loading, right? You should have control over the loading. So you can see here, whenever I make a call to the get countries, the first check I do is that, is the countries collection null? If the countries collection is null, then only go and load it, or else don't go and load it again and again. So this is again one more important thing out here, lazy loading. The last one, which I feel is very important, and this is where your knowledge will show off, is that there should be a double null check, right? So why a double null check? For example, you can see out here we are using the lock keyword. So if somebody makes a call to the get countries, we don't want to lock this again and again and again. Remember that lock actually needs a lot of resources. To acquire a lock or to release a lock, you need a lot of resources out here, right? So this lock keyword should not be executed unnecessarily. So you can see here there's one more null check here, saying that if the countries is null, then only go and lock it, or else you don't have to go inside this if condition, right? So I think at least when you are speaking in the interview, 3 or 4 things, right? Whole part relationship, you are going through a root class. Second one, you should take care of multi-threading, thread safety, locking. You should have a provision of doing lazy loading, right? And also if you can talk about performance, that is great. So when you answer in such a way in depth, right, this is where the interviewer connects to you. Let us go ahead and run this program as well, because my goal here is to not only just make you pass in the interview, but also to give you knowledge, right? And definitely, both of them go in hand. When you see a demo, when you understand a concept, right, you are in a better position to argue in the interview. You are in a better position to handle the cross questions, right? So first thing, we should not be able to create the object of the singleton class because the constructor is private. You can see that I'm getting an error out here, that it is inaccessible due to the protection level, right? The second thing you can see here in line number 12 here is that we are using that singleton class, which is now the root, to first get access of the instance. Once we have access of that single instance, through that single instance now we can go ahead and say, okay, get me countries, get me the hit counter, or get me states, get me currency, and so on, right? So let us go ahead and run this and let us see how it looks like. So first thing is, you will get the instance, you'll get the access of the instance, the root instance, right, the single instance, and then you would go ahead and get the access of, and then you can go ahead and get the access of the resources, right? And second thing, whenever you are getting access of the instance, remember the pattern which is followed out here throughout is, first you can see it will check. The first check is first thing, everything is lazy loaded. So until you don't call the instance, you won't get the instance. The singleton is not initialized, right? So if you see here, so first thing you can see, until in this first call now the instance is getting initialized. Second, you can see we have taken care of threading, right? All that is again there. Also this first null check is for the performance, right? Why didn't it go inside? Looks like the instance was already created. How was it created? Why was the instance created? Let me rerun the program again. I don't know why it did not go inside that if condition. Let me, I think this exe was running out here. Let us go ahead and run this again. Strange. So there it is. So it goes inside it. And if the instance is null, yeah, that's it. I think the instance was already running, and that's why that singleton object was created, right? So first thing, it goes and locks the object, checks, this is the first time we are doing it, lazy loading, right? And gives you back the instance. Once you have the instance with you, now you can go and say, okay, get me countries, get me states. And the best part here is again the same kind of structure, same kind of pattern here. First, go ahead and check if the countries is loaded, right? If it is null, then only go and lock the object, and then yes, again check if the countries is null. Remember, this double check is because in between somebody can call get countries, right? So that's why the double check is there, right? And then again initialize the countries. So now this is lazy loading, and there it is, right? So if I go and again say get countries, so you can see the countries collection is out here. If I again go and say get countries out here, it will not go inside this thing, and it will not do any locking, right? And so on. So basically three things, when you're explaining singleton pattern, the first one is that, there should be a root. Remember, there should be a whole part relationship. There should be a root object through which we access things. Second, we should take care of making sure that only one instance is created by the private constructor. We should make sure that we are using a static keyword out here, right, for the singleton. We should take care of the locking. We should take care of the lazy loading. One of the things the interviewer would definitely like to know, do you understand the difference between static and singleton? So the two questions what you see on the screen at this moment is targeted around the same, right? So let us try to understand the question first. So the question is that we have this root class out here, singleton, right? So if I go and if I put a static out here, then I don't need this private constructor, right? So I don't need this private constructor out here. I can get rid of it, because a singleton class, you don't need to create it. It will always have a single instance. So there is no way anybody can go and create an instance, right? In the first call itself, the singleton object will be initialized. So the question is that if you just put a static keyword out here, remove the private, make this list as static, will that not work? Why we have to do this private constructor, right? And the second question says that, for example, we want a single instance of the countries, isn't it? So can't we just go and make it static like this? Just make one static somewhere on your program globally and just use it. That is also singleton, because singleton, what does it say? Singleton says that a single instance of an object has to be created. So just by putting static, everything should work, isn't it? So let us try to answer this question, right? The first thing, which will come to my mind, or the first thing which I would like to comment here, is that static is a keyword. It is a programming keyword, while singleton is a pattern. It's a design pattern. It's a design pattern, with a certain structure of code. So as soon as you say design pattern, there are certain codes around it, like the private, the constructor, putting the lock object, right, making sure that only one instance is created, performance, right? So it is not just one keyword, right? So the first difference which I want to point out here is that static is a keyword, it's a programming keyword, while singleton is a design pattern. The second thing is that static, definitely, the complete singleton use a static internally. First point. So static is the base on which singleton is created, is established. But singleton has many other things. It has thread safety. A static keyword does not provide that by default, right? It has, you want to make sure that a single instance is created, right? You want to do lazy loading, right? You want to make sure there is a lock performance. So if you really ask me, right, singleton pattern, in my mind what goes is, singleton pattern is equal to, yes, we need the static keyword, but at the same time we should have thread safety, right? We should have lazy loading, we should have performance. So there are many other things, you know, which singleton pattern brings into picture. So static keyword is just one single part of it, right? The other point which I want to point out here is that if I make this class as static, right, I lose many object-oriented programming features. For example, if I make this class as static, I cannot implement an interface. For example, if I want to implement an interface, I will get an error. I cannot do inheritance also. So if I try to inherit, this again does not work. For example, you can see, if you see, cannot implement interfaces. Second, base class must come before interfaces. Okay, so if I put here, so inheritance, implementation of interfaces, all this actually then we lose it. You can see here now, static class cannot derive from a singleton parent class. Singleton static classes cannot implement interfaces, right? So again, these all things I lose, right? So I think, you know, there are three prime things, you know, which you can specify when this question is, when these two questions are asked. First one, we lose almost all the object-oriented programming features like implementing an interface, inheritance from a class, right? The second important thing is, when you talk about singleton pattern, we also need to make sure it is thread safe. We also need to make sure it is lazy loaded. We also need to make sure it is performance oriented, and many other things which at this moment is out of the scope of the discussion, right? So singleton is a pattern while static is a keyword, right? So these three things I will talk about: object-oriented programming concepts, thread safety, lazy loading, performance, and the third one, which is a punchline, that static is a keyword while singleton is a design pattern. This question is put forward to check that, do you understand the importance of thread safety, right? That's what this question is trying to test, right? So as an architect, you know, do you understand what can be the implication that if you have a multi-threaded environment, and if the both of the threads are trying to access the same object at the same time, what can be the issue, right? So let us try to understand, in case of a singleton pattern, what is the issue. So multi-threaded means what? Multi-threaded means that multiple threads can execute that code, right? And C# is multi-threaded. So in this get countries, you can have a situation wherein one thread is executing this line of code, which is initializing the countries. At the same time, another thread is executing this line of code where he's trying to get the countries, right? So think about it, that you have, let's say, two threads have entered into get countries, right? So one thread out here, let's assume that this is T1, it is initializing the countries. In your database, you have 100 countries, assume. You have 100 countries, right? But let us say that he has loaded only 5. He has loaded only 5 and he is still loading, right? Let us say this process is going on. At the same time, another thread comes up. And this thread, definitely because the 5 countries are loaded, it sees this is not null and it starts executing this line of code, right? It does not go into that if condition. So it is very much possible that when he returns back, he will return back with 5 countries, but in the database you have 100 countries, right? So what happens is, if your code is thread unsafe, you can have undesirable results, right? Buggy results, right? So what do? You go ahead and you use a lock keyword. So when you say lock out here, right? So whatever objects are participating inside this lock thing out here, right? So whatever keywords, whatever objects are participating inside this, they get locked. In other words, until this initialize countries does not finish, until the countries object is not fully loaded, right? Or until it does not cross this scope out here, right? All the other threads will go in a blocking mode. All the other thread will go in a blocking mode, right? So what this lock does, the lock says that, okay, only one thread can enter at a time here, right? First thing inside this lock, right? And when that object is locked out there, the other lines of the code will be waiting until this country's object is filled. So that's why in case of a singleton pattern, this is very essential, right? So that we don't get any undesirable results. When you get these kind of questions, right, it means that the person whom you're talking with is a real architect. He has really grown from the scratch. He understands things, right? So now you have to be more alert, right? Isn't it? So here it is. What is this double null check, right? So first thing, let us start with the internal check. This check out here is there for lazy loading. Lazy loading means that if the countries is null, then only load it and don't keep loading it again and again, right? So that is what this first check is, right? Now the second check out here, right? The second check, the top check out here, this is for performance reason. See, if the countries is null, then only you want to go ahead and put a lock, right? Or else what will happen is, if you put a lock, right, then what happens is this complete scope, becomes synchronous. It becomes single threaded, right? So if it becomes single threaded, then the performance decreases, right? So it does not make sense that if the countries is not null, you are entering into the lock keyword, isn't it? So that's why this first one here is for performance check. This is to make sure that the lock scope does not execute unnecessarily. And this internal one is for lazy loading. Gang of Four design pattern surfaced out publicly in the year 1994. It was released via a book which was written by the four devs. In those times, the examples were by using C++, so most of the examples were using C++. Now, if you look 30 years ahead, right, evolving programming languages like C# and Java and Python and many of those languages, what they have done is they have embraced many of the Gang of Four design pattern in the programming language itself. So for example, let us say if you want to implement iterator pattern, then you have IEnumerator and IEnumerable in C#, right? And I'm sure that you have such kind of interfaces in Java as well, right? So these two questions out here, is trying to test you as an architect that, can we go ahead and can we avoid this double if check, this lock keyword? Because remember that these things, we're going to go and repeat for every resource we share globally. So for example, now this is get countries. Let us say in the same way we have get states, we have get currency, right? So every time we are going to go and have those resources, we have to write this line of code, right? So is there something in the programming language itself in C# which we can use, which we can implement and make this code easy? So in case of C#, we have something called as a lazy keyword. This lazy keyword, not only helps you to load lazily, but at the same time it will do the double null check also for the performance, right? So if you see out here, for example, look at this get countries. You can see it is just one single line of code. And if you remember our old singleton code out here, you can see there are so many lines of code out here, right? So that has now literally become one line of code, right? So now, so if you see out here, now you will say that, okay, so where does it get loaded, right? So what you have to do is that you have to go ahead somewhere in the constructor or somewhere where you define the variable, right? You have to define that this countries collection, how will it get loaded? For example, I'm saying out here, this countries collection will get loaded by this initialize countries. This initialize countries is a method which actually goes and gives back a list, right? So what will happen now? You just define out here that how this will get loaded. And this will be called when you call the dot value. So until you don't call the dot value, this initialize countries does not fire, right? So for example, if I go and if I run this, look at this, let us go and see. So now if you see here, he is doing a get countries, right? Remember, this is the code out here. I'm actually calling the get countries. So if you go and if you move your mouse right, first thing you will find that the value is null. Look at that, the value is null. But as soon as you make a call to the value, it will go and it will fire initialize countries. You can see lazy loading is now getting implemented, right? So this lazy loading gets fired, it gives him the countries collection, and if you now see, right, to come out, right, if you now go and see the countries value, you will see now the count is 3 and we have 3 countries inside it, right? So by using the lazy keyword, right, the singleton pattern code can be minimized a lot. And I think, when you are, if you're using the new C# features now, I think this is the way it should go ahead, right? And you should try to avoid writing, such kind of lengthy code.
Okay, first thing, congratulations to you, congratulations to me. You know why? Because we have completed 1 hour of this video. 1 hour of this video has almost 1 hour has been completed. Now, before I move to the next questions, right, I want to talk about a very serious topic out here, right? It's a serious topic, but hilarious situation, right? That kind of situation it is. So what happens? We are recruited as architects. You enter the company and you think that your work profile is that you should be giving a technical roadmap, by creating an HLD document or by creating a low-level design document. Your work profile is that if anywhere technically the developer is stuck or the team is stuck, you come out, you go out there and you try to solve the situations. Probably as an architect, you participate in complex POCs as well, right? But then what happens is you are taken as an architect and then you are given a work profile of a team lead. In Mumbai we say iska popat hona bolte, right? So how many of you guys are taken as architects and suddenly you are allocated work as a team lead? If that has happened with you, please put down in the comments below, how did you handle this situation, right? What did you do? And how did you overcome the situation, or did you just resign and go away? Let me know that in the comments below so that many other people will also benefit, right? Right. Okay. Now the next question, the next series of question is on GUI architecture, MVC, MVP and MVVM. So let us get started.
If you are getting this question, that means that the interviewer who is interviewing you is a veteran. He understands software architecture. He has read a lot of literature on architecture, right? Because I have rarely seen, I have seen good architects using this word GUI architecture pattern. So what exactly GUI architecture pattern? When you look at your code, right? If you look at your code, right, you have a view and you have components at the back. When I say components means I'm talking about model, I'm talking about business logic, I'm talking about a lot of other things, right? So what GUI architecture pattern does, it actually helps to, it refers to how you can organize this interaction code between the view and the components structurally, right? Structurally means, do you want to go and move this code into a controller? So then you have the MVC pattern. Do you want to go and move that interaction code into a presenter? Then you have a model view presenter. Do you want to move that interaction code into a model view model? Then you have a MVVM pattern, right? So GUI architecture pattern refers to how to organize structurally the interaction between the user, the view and the components, right, in a software application. Also, this helps you to maintain clear separation of concerns, right? So, if you look at MVC, right, in MVC, what do we have? We have a controller, we have a view, we have a model, right? So now you have separation of concerns out here, saying that the view will do the look and feel, the model will have the business logic, and the controller will do all the interaction between the view and the model, right? In the same way it goes for presenter, MVP, and the same way it goes for MVVM. So remember, whenever you are answering this question, try to take out this word separation of concerns. So you can see now here is a typical code which a developer can write inside a view. You can see that this is a simple button click event out here. So in this button click event, you can see that the developer is doing a lot of things. First is he's interacting with the model, right? And he's incrementing the value of the counter, right? So here the model is a counter. It's a simple counter which we are incrementing. Second, the developer can do things like, reading from the model and updating the UI. Now this can be as simple as taking the value and updating the label, or taking the value and updating the text box, or it can be as complex as binding a grid, right? He can also write some UI manipulation logic like enabling and disabling, and some aesthetics like color, etc. So if the value is greater than 10, then go and make the color red. So you can see this UI code over here is quite complex, right? So the GUI architecture pattern, what it does is it says that, okay, let us go and move this code into a controller, right? So, and this controller will decide, so once the hit comes to the controller will decide what to do, etc. And then the view will have the look and feel. So this color red, etc. will go inside this view, right? This calling of this can go over here. So GUI architecture pattern actually helps you to organize the code behind the UI interaction code into separate layers. Whenever you are answering questions which are around GUI architecture patterns like MVC, MVP, MVVM, right? One of the things, which you would like to emphasize is that all of this architecture pattern implement a very important design principle, which is called as separation of concerns, or we can say SOC, right? So what is separation of concern? Separation of concern is a design principle, right, which advocates, which promotes that we should break our software system into distinct section. We should break our software system into distinct section, and each section will be addressing a separate concern or a separate aspect of the software functionality. For example, when you say MVC, right, so you will say in the MVC, the view is for look and feel, it is for positioning, the model will do the work of business logic, right? And then you have controller, which will do the connection between the view and the model, right? So it will act like a mediator, it will take the user input, right? So when you are putting the concerns or the logic into separate buckets out here, you get a much better organized code, right? And a much better understandable code. So whenever you're doing a handover, right, these kind of codes are much easier to understand, right? So remember that whenever you are defining the interviews, or whenever you're defining MVC, MVP, MVVM, one of the words you should emphasize is that, or one of the benefit you should emphasize is that separation of concerns. Now this question is one of the most asked question, when it comes to architecture interviews. And when you get questions around explain MVC or MVP or MVVM, any architecture pattern, right? What you can do is that you can divide your answer into 3 pieces, right? See, remember, at the end of the day, everyone knows MVC, everyone knows MVP, right? The most important thing is that how are you presenting the answer during the interview, right? So I would suggest that divide your answer into 3 sections when somebody asks you a architecture explanation. First one is talk about the different layers of that architecture, right? Second one is every layer, what it does, explain that. And third one is if you can try to make understand the flow of that architecture, right? For example, in MVC, the way I will answer this question is that the MVC architecture is divided into 3 sections. One is the controller, one is the model, another one is the view, right? So in the controller, what happens is, we take the user inputs, we load the model, and we invoke the view and so on. So controller is the front facing to the user input. It is the first thing which is triggered in MVC, right? After that, the model has the business logic. It has the business logic, it has the calculation logic and so on. And the view is for look and feel, for positioning and alignment, right? So in the second section, try to talk about, the concerns, what every section has, right? And finally, then talk about, the flow. So if you look at the flow of MVC, right, the flow of MVC is that the first thing which is hit is the controller. The controller goes and takes the request, right? It takes the user request, and then this user request is then depending on the user request, it goes and loads the appropriate model. So you can see it loads the appropriate model. Once the model is loaded, it will take that model and invoke the appropriate view, and the view will punch the model in the UI. It will say that, okay, stick this data here, stick that data in the div tag, bind that grid, right? And then finally the response comes out, right? So remember that in case of MVC, the first thing which hits is the controller. Controller goes and loads the model, and then that model is passed to the view. So controller is like a mediator. It is like a traffic police between these three things, right? So if I'm supposed to answer this question, this is how it will go, right? In MVC, what we do is that we divide our project into three layers: controller, view, and model. The controller is which gets invoked first. It takes the user inputs, it loads the model, it invokes the view, and so on. Model is where we have the business logic. View is where we have the look and feel and positioning, right? And the flow is that the first hit comes to the controller loads the model, and then the model is passed to the view, and the view is then displayed on the browser or on the UI. So let us go and see a demo. You will say, Shiv, why do we have to see the demo? Well, by seeing a demo, what happens is, that fundamental gets impinged in your mind. And the most important thing is that when you are getting cross questions during the interview, right, a demo really helps you to give a good picture to him, right? So seeing a practical definitely helps out, right? And remember that, my goal here is not to just make you pass some architecture interview or something, right? My goal here is dual purpose. I also want to increase your knowledge. I want to see that you understand that fundamental well, right? Right, so here it is. It's a very, very simple UI, and this same UI, this same project I'll be using for MVP and MVVM ahead, right? So there's a simple button out here. If I click on increment, it goes and it updates a counter. So the counter is the model. So I have tried to keep it very simple out here. So you can see here, the first hit will go to the controller. So when I click on this increment, you can see the first hit goes to the controller, right? So this is the controller out here. At this moment I'm using ASP.NET MVC, but for other MVC architecture also this is quite valid, right? So you can see the first thing is the operation is done on the model. Remember that diagram which I had flashed, right? So the first the operation happens on the model. For example, here you would load the data, you will make a call to the repository or whatever, right? At this moment I'm just incrementing the counter, and then this value, then this object, this model is passed to the view. So you can see now this model is passed to the view, and what happens inside the view, right? Inside the view, this model, so this is the model out here. At this moment this model just has a value, the counter is 1. It takes that value and sticks it to the UI. So must be now at this moment the scenario is very simple, but think about it. If you have a grid, if you have a div tag, then accordingly this thing can become more complex, right? But if you look at the view, right, what the view does is, the view actually looks at the look and feel, it looks at the UI controls, it looks at the positioning and so on, right? But it does not get into handling the user input, right? And then once this view is punched in, you can go and you can see the output, right? So very quickly, this is what that diagram was, right? So you can see the diagram here at the right hand side. Just to revise that, so you first hit the controller loads the model, he takes the model and gives it to the UI. The UI punches that model or sticks the model data at appropriate places, and then you get the response, right? Now for implementing MVC, you need to have some kind of an automation. For example, in Microsoft we use the ASP.NET MVC template, right? So by using the ASP.NET MVC template, it becomes quite easy to write the MVC code, right? So you can see here in case of ASP.NET MVC, they divide this, they have separate folders of controller, view and models, and developers can go and write code accordingly. So again, this is an architecture level question out here, explain the MVP architecture. And remember, as I've said in the previous video, always try to answer this question in three sections. So first one talking about what are those sections, second one talking about the responsibility of each section, and third one talking about the flow, right? So in MVP architecture, what happens is the project is divided into three pieces out here. One is the presenter, second is the view, and the third one is the model, right? So what does the view does here? The view does exactly what was happening in MVC. It has user controls, it handles the look and feel, it looks at positioning, it looks at alignment, right? But here the view is completely dependent on the presenter. So what the view does is, when it has any user interaction, so anything happens with the view, he just goes and calls the presenter and says the presenter that tell me what to do, right? So the presenter does all the hard work. The presenter is like a mediator between the view and the model. So what does the presenter do? Presenter takes the input from the view, loads the model and updates the view accordingly, right? So you can think about presenter here does most of the work, right? And model is having the business logic, right? So how is the flow out here? The flow goes like this. The first hit comes to the view. Remember, in case of MVC, if you remember, the first hit was coming to the controller. So the first hit was coming to the controller, he was loading the model and passing it to the view. But here it is very different. The first hit comes to the view, and what the view does is he passes a reference to the presenter and says to the presenter, saying that, you know, you have to tell me what to do. I'm completely dependent on you, right? So once he passes the reference, after that, whenever view makes a call, or whenever the user makes a call like a button click or a grid click or whatever, right, that view, that event, you know, the view passes to the presenter talks with the model, he goes and takes the model and updates the UI, and then the response comes back. So that means in the view is completely dependent on the presenter out here. This view over here is not aware at all, you know, what is the model, because he's going through the presenter, so he has no idea of the model as such, right? So let us go ahead and see the code out here, because once we see the code, right, we can understand it better, right? So let us try to go and demonstrate the same by using a code. So here is a code base, you know, for MVP. Now remember that to demonstrate MVP, I am using WinForm out here. Because MVP is more suitable for old technologies like WinForm or Java applets or ASP.NET Web Forms, you know, ASPX code behind. So at that time MVP was used a lot. So you can see out here this is a WinForm. Again, what I've done is I've just kept it very simple. This is the counter model out here, and this counter model will be incremented. I've just kept a very simple model at the back. So if you look at without MVP, what happens is the UI takes up all the load. So he has to go and update the model, he has to take the value of the model and update the UI, and depending on the value, if he wants to go and update the look and feel of the UI, that also all he has to do, right? But if you are using MVP, that means if you are having a presenter, then things are different. In case of a presenter, what happens is, the first thing is, so if you look at the code with MVP, right, in case of with MVP, if you see, he just goes and passes. So if you call increment out here, he does not do anything. He says, okay, this is not my job. What I'll do is I will just go and pass everything to the presenter, and presenter will update me with what to do with the UI. So if you see out here, over here, you know, the label black color or back color, I'm sorry, and the label value, you know, he was updating it. But look at it with MVP. He is just listening. He's saying that, okay, the MVP will tell me what is the color. You know, the MVP will tell me what is the value. So you can think about, you know, in case of MVP, the view is like is completely dependent on the presenter. That's why a lot of time, you know, we say that this is a passive view. A passive view means the view is not doing anything. It only has the user controls out here, but rest of all the things is done by the presenter, right? So let me go and run this. So if I go and run this, right, the first thing we can see what happens is this is the form out here. He is actually going and calling the presenter. The first thing what he does is he submits himself completely to the presenter. You can see the current instance of the view. I'm completely passing it to the presenter out here, and the presenter says, okay, fine. He will get a reference of the view and he will keep this reference with him, right? So this is the first thing which happens, right? After that, you know, when I go and say, okay, now go ahead and increment the counter. Now what he does is he says, okay, you want to increment the counter? I'm going to go and call the presenter, right? So it goes to the presenter, and what does the presenter do? The presenter says, okay, let me go and first increment the model, right? And after that he says, okay, now I have to go and tell the UI what is the current value. So you can see he is calling the show value out here, right? So if you see the show value, right, this is the show value. He goes and he makes a callback through the view. Remember, he has the view reference, right? This underscore view is a view reference, please note, which has been passed previously. So from here he makes a callback to the view and says, okay, this is the value, and the view only goes and takes the value and updates it to the text box, right, to the label. Second, again, like, you know, when it comes to updating the color, you can see again he says, okay, For red color, what we have to do? We have to first check in it is greater than 10. Okay, if it is not greater than 10, he is not doing it. Okay, so now if you see out here, let us go and increment it greater than 10. So I'll say, so let me go and remove all these debug points, right? Okay, so yeah, I've just put all these debug points out here. So as soon as he says 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, he says, oh, like it is about 10 now, and we have to apply the red color. So again, what he does, he goes back here and he says, call back the view and say the color is red. And what he does, he's just listening. He says, okay, what is the color red? He goes and updates it to the red color, and there it is red, right? So in case of model view presenter, the view submits himself to the presenter. You can think about the presenter is like a guru, and the view is like a student of the guru, and he says, okay, you tell me what to do. I have submitted myself to you, right? So that's what the model view presenter is. And remember that in case of a model view presenter, the first hit comes to the view. The first hit comes to the view, and the view, whenever you make a call, he will go and call the presenter, and the presenter will go and make a callback, right? He will make a callback via the reference. So this reference is out here. Right? Now, one more question which comes out here is that what is the importance of the interface in MVP, right? So if you see here, I did not discuss about this. There is an interface here called as eye counter view, right? You can see this is an interface out here. This interface, represents that what kind of action the view will do. So for example, the view will actually go and call increment or decrement. The view, we have to go and update the view back with the value of the counter value. We have to go and change the color if the value changes, right? So these are all the actions, which the view wants, right? And this eye counter view is implemented. It is implemented over here in the form, right? And when you pass the reference, now please hear me very clearly out here, and also please go and see this code. When you pass the reference, you are passing the reference of the form, but the presenter is not having the reference of the form. He is having the reference of the eye view, the eye counter view. So you can see here, I'm not saying here form, it is the eye counter view, and through this he makes a callback. So you can think about this interface, sits in between the view and the presenter, and the presenter makes a callback via using this interface reference. So he does not reference directly the form, but he references interface out here. So when you pass this over here, this gets typecasted, this gets typecasted, or I will say because of polymorphism, the form is typecasted into an interface, and via the interface you can start making callback of apply color, show value, and so on. Now, one more connected question which can come around here is that what exactly is a passive view in case of an MVP? So this view, what you see out here, is a passive view. Why? Because he is not doing anything, right? He is completely dependent on the presenter. That's why it is called as a passive view, because over here, what are we doing? We are just having the user controls, the text box and the labels, right? And he's just forwarding all the requests to the presenter, and he's listening to the presenter. So the view is not doing anything. All the, whatever jugglery or whatever the hard work is done by the presenter out here, right? So that's why in case of MVP, a lot of developers also say that this is a passive view architecture, where the view is submitting itself to the presenter. And as I've given you an example saying that the view is like a student who just submits himself to the presenter, and presenter updates back with whatever value and logic which the view is needing. So that's why sometimes it is called as a passive view as well. So here I have tried to answer 3 questions. First thing, what is MVP, that we have looked into. Also, one question which can come around MVP, which I've addressed out here, is that what is the importance of the interface. So remember I said this interface, what you see out here, it acts like a mediator between the presenter and the view to pass back the callback messages, right? And the third one, why it is called as a passive view, because we are submitting, the view is submitting himself completely to the presenter, and the presenter is doing all the hard work. So that's why it is called as a passive view. Now this MVVM architecture is same like MVP. So here again we have three sections. So we have a view, we have a model, and we have a view model which acts like a bridge between the view and the model. It acts like a mediator between the view and the model, right? So again, same like MVP, the view here takes the care of look and feel for positioning, alignment. The view model is like a mediator, and the model has the business logic. Now one of the questions over here the interviewer can ask you is that, so what is the difference? The biggest difference between MVVM and MVP is that they have automated binding, they have declarative binding and commands. So in other words, in case of a presenter, we have to write code, right, to update the UI or to take the data from the UI, right? Over here the technology, for example, like WPF, right, they support automated bindings, they have declarative bindings, right? So this is absolutely same like MVP, but in this case there are automated bindings, and here the view is not a passive view, means the view does not go and submit himself to the view model, but rather it talks through these bindings, right? So let us go and see an example of WPF and how this MVVM looks like. So here is an example of MVVM architecture. Now please note that one of the important things in the interview which you should highlight is that for MVVM it is very important that the technology should have automated bindings. So for example, Angular is one of the technologies which has bindings like ng model and so on. WPF has bindings, right? So you can see that this is WPF out here. It's again the same project what we had, right? The same project what I've demonstrated for MVC and MVP. So when you click on this button, the counter will get incremented, right? So you can see here over in this button out here, this is the XAML file. If you first go and look at the code behind, there is nothing in the code behind actually. I mean, like, you can happily go and remove this button click as well. Over here it is empty, so there is nothing out here, right? But if you go and look at the look at the XML file out here, so this is the button. In this button click, this is a command. This command is the binding, right, which is binding with the btn click, and the counter view model has the btn click. So automatically this will get binded with that, right? For example, you have the label and you want to bind the value of that counter object, the value, right? So you can say binding again, and this will get binded with the value. The value is nothing but this one, right? In the same way, look at the background color. Also, I have put up a background color out here. This background color is binding with the color converter, right? What is this color converter? This color converter is this code out here, right? So this code will go and check if the value is greater than 10, it will give out the red brush or the white brush, right? So we can see here when it comes to MVVM pattern, you need to have some kind of an automation of binding, right? So let us go and run this. So if I run this and let us go and debug and see how it looks like. So there it is. You can see first the RGB color has fired, right? It checks for the value. You can see again it is checking for is valid. This is valid is for the button click, if the button can be enabled or not, right? So when I click on the button, you can see it first checks for the valid, saying that okay, are there any negative values? Nothing as such, right? This is just a validation check, and then right, where is my debug button? Okay, let me continue. So you can see then it calls the increment, it increments the value, and then it sends out an event out here saying that the value has changed. And then what happens is also the color gets evaluated, saying that okay, is this value greater than 10? The value is still 1, so nothing, right? And you can see the value 1, right? So because of bindings, all this automation, all this code at the back end is firing, all the automation is done out here, and once the color increments, you can see that it shows a red color as well, right? So when it comes to MVVM architecture, so we have the view. Remember here the first hit comes to the view. Both for MVVM and MVP, first hit comes to the view, right? So the hit comes to the view talks to the view model by automated bindings, by command, or by event binding or by text bindings, right? and then the view model uses the model. So if you look at the view model is using the model at the back. So this is the model at the back which is used, right? And it operates on the model and updates the UI again via the bindings. Now this concept of view model we have discussed in MVVM, right? In MVVM we have said that view model stands between the model and the view, right? But remember that this view model class is also discussed generically also. It is used generically also in MVC, MVP, or in a 3-layer architecture or in a 3-tier architecture, okay? Definitely the view model which is present in MVVM does the same thing, but it has those extra bindings in it, right? But in general, if the interviewer is asking what is a view model class is nothing but it is a class, which actually encapsulates the model. It provides everything that is needed for the view. I'm trying to emphasize this answer. It provides everything that is needed for the view. For example, now, in case of our counter thing, you can see now this is the counter model. So this counter view model is encapsulating the counter model. And what does the view need? The view needs the data of the counter, right? So that is present in the model. It also needs a background color, depending on the value, it is red or green. So you can see here for this view, it is providing the data, right? It is also providing the background color. It can also provide the foreground color. It can also provide enabling, disabling, and a lot of other things, right? So when we say a view model, right? A view model class provides the data as well as, any kind of aesthetics, or logic, which is needed for the view to be driven, like colors or styles or enabling, disabling, or loading the grid and so on, right? Or even captions, right? So it provides both the data as well as the aesthetics. Now please note that when you are talking about the view model class in case of the MVVM pattern, it is again the same thing. You can see out here, this is the view model class in the MVVM. It is encapsulating the model, but it is providing everything that is needed for the view. So what does the view need? The view needs the value. The view needs the increment to increment the value, right? The view needs a color. So you can see that there is a color also which is provided out here by this RGB color, right? So basically this again here it is the same thing, but remember that here bindings are also present in case of MVC or in case of MVP or in case of 3-layer, right? Probably we don't have the bindings, but still a simple class can also be termed as a view model. So just summarizing, view model class is nothing but a class which provides everything that is needed for the view, which can be a data, which can be aesthetics, which can be enabling, disabling, or any kind of business logic. Now this is a little bit of a tricky question. So how will you make a choice of MVP or MVC or MVVM? So if you get a project, what will you choose, right? Till my, at least to my best experience, right, really, choosing these three architecture is not in your hand. It is actually dictated mostly by the technology. Means what? For example, if the technology is supporting loading of the view first, right? If the technology is supporting loading of the view first, means, for example, when we are talking about WPF or WinForm, these technologies actually load the view first. So if you're loading the view first, then you don't have too many options. You have to either go with MVP or you have to either go with MVVM. Now, if the technology supports automated binding, for example, WPF has automated bindings, Angular has automated bindings, right? Then, you mostly go with MVVM, right? And if it is a legacy technology, like WinForm, right, or ASP.NET Web Form, code behind, then again, there are no bindings out there, then you have to actually go with MVP. Now, if the technology is not loading the view first, it is loaded through a controller or so on, then you have to go with MVC, for example, Spring, right, or Laravel, or our ASP.NET MVC. All of these technologies don't load the view first. You have to go via the controller. So frankly, which architecture to use, right, it is dictated by the technology. And for that technology, that architecture always suits, right? So, when do you choose what? Depends on the technology, right? If the technology is supported automated bindings, MVVM. If the technology does not support automated binding, MVP. If the technology supports loading of the view later on through the code, then you can go with MVC. When this question comes up to say the difference between MVC, MVP and MVVM, I would suggest at least talk about two things. One is first talk about the flow, how each one of the architectures actually execute and flow, and second, talk about where to use. At least these two things should come in, right? So what happens in case of MVC? In case of MVC, the first hit comes to the controller loads the model and the view, right? So over here you have the controller, the first hit comes to the controller goes and loads the model and then passes this model to the view, right? But in case of both MVP as well as MVVM, right, the first hit comes to the view. This is the important thing which you should be speaking. So in case of MVP, you have the view and the model, and in between stands the presenter, right? In case of MVVM also same, the first hit comes to the view and then you have the view model in between and then you have the model, right? Now the biggest difference in case of MVP and MVVM is that in case of MVVM, remember that we have automated bindings. We have bindings in between, right? So we have bindings in between. In case of MVP, what happens? This presenter is a class. So the view submits himself to the presenter. So a lot of time, this MVP is also termed as passive view. Why? Because he submits himself to the presenter and the presenter does everything for him. So over here, we don't have any kind of automated bindings, right? So first hit comes to the controller, then to the model and the view. Here the first hit comes to the view, here also the first hit comes to the view, and then the presenter and the model and the view model and the model. But here you have automated bindings. In this case you don't have automated bindings, right? And where to use it, as I've already said, that the technology dictates it. For example, for Spring, Laravel and ASP.NET, MVC, Angular, it is MVC by default, right? But in case legacy technologies like WebForm and WinForm and GWT and Vardin, all these are legacy ones. Over there the first hit comes to the view and there is no automated binding, so you will go for MVP. And then when you have automated bindings, like for example WPF and Angular and Knockout and React and Aurelia and all, it is MVVM. Now one very important thing to note out here is you can see that some technologies support both of them. You can see, for example, Angular is supporting both of them. So what happens in case of Angular, right? In Angular, the first hit comes to the component goes and loads the model and talks with the view and so on, right? But also there are automated bindings as well. So you can think about some of the technologies try to take both of the best parts. So they take the best part of loading from the controller as well as they have bindings as well, which makes them also fall into the category of MVVM, right? The next, the third thing, this is not important one, but still I think it's a brownie point. The biggest difference, which separates MVVM from MVC and MVP is declarative bindings. So declarative bindings or automated bindings are present in MVVM but not in MVC and MVP, right? So whenever you get this question, right, first explain the flow, very important. Second, talk about where to use it, and always emphasize the point that it is technology dependent at the end of the day. Then talk about automated bindings and also try to highlight that some of the technologies can mix MVC and MVVM, like Angular, right? Like Knockout, right? So some of the technologies can mix both of them. Now some architecture terminologies have a very thin line, means they look very similar, right? But they do have a subtle difference. So what happens is in case of interviews, for some of the interviewer it is okay that if this thin line is not understood, but for some of the interviewer it is like, oh, like he does not know that, right? So one of those terminologies, where there is a very thin line is the difference between layer and tier, right? So what is the difference between a 3-layer and a 3-tier? First thing, both of these things, actually emphasize on one very important point which we have discussed in one of the previous question is separation of concern. That means every layer or every entity will do only his thing. So like when you say 3-layer, that means that your project is divided into 3 layers: the view, which is the presentation, the business logic, which has the model and other things, right? And the data access layer, which talks with the database, right? So when you say 3-layer, that means that your project is organized in logical layers like this. So this is more of a logical layers internally. But it is very much possible that when you are deploying this into an infrastructure, it is possible that you will run the view or you will run the presentation in a different box, you will run the business logic in a different box, you will run the data access layer and database in a different box, and must be the communication between these layers can happen through HTTP REST or TCP IP or queues or some other mechanism which the architect decides, right? So when you say 3-tier, it is about how these layers will get deployed into the infrastructure. Will they get deployed into the same computer, or will they get deployed into different computers? If they're getting deployed into different computers, right, then you talk about tier, right? And when you want to just talk about the logical thing, saying that, okay, how is my project organized, right, then you talk about the word layer, right? So 3-layer means the logical way of your project, how the project is organized, and 3-tier means how these layers are later on deployed into the infrastructure, right? And it is very essential to understand that as soon as you say 3-tier, right, complexity increases, because now you have to take into account that how will you communicate through the network. So you have to write extra code for HTTP or for TCP IP or the web API calls and so on, right? So definitely the time you use the word 3-tier, that means that we are also talking about now communication complexity, right? When you say 3-layer, that means that you have the 3 layers and they can be deployed on the same box, right? So 3-layer is a logical view, right? A logical thought process when you look at the separation of concerns, and 3-tier is more of the infrastructure deployment or physical representation.
Okay guys, so that brings us to the end of 25 questions. We have covered 25 questions, and very quickly let us see what we have covered. I'm flashing it on my screen. So you can see out here we started with explain your project architecture, right? And I explained you that how you should explain your project architecture. We talked about the difference between architecture style, architecture pattern, design pattern, different types of design pattern. And I talked about, how you should answer which design pattern have you used in a project. And then I took one of the patterns, Singleton pattern, and we saw some questions around Singleton pattern, like why does it need a private constructor, static versus singleton, thread safety, double null check, right, lazy keyword, and so on. And then we deep dived into GUI architecture pattern, where I talked about MVC, MVP, and MVVM, right? And also talked about passive view. And then I discussed about layered architecture and tiered architecture. Now in my next lesson, my plan is to focus on solid principles. Solid is one of those asked questions. At least I feel that personally, I don't think that you become an architect by knowing solid, but it is one of the asked questions, right? So what my plan is in the next lecture, that is lab 2, my plan is to cover what is solid, SRP, OCP, LISCO principle, how to fix it, interface segregation principle, connection between LISCO and ISP, and dependency inversion. In dependency inversion, we discuss about higher level modules and lower level modules, right? Dependency inversion benefit and so on, right? So at least, nice 20-30 questions, which is around solid. And then lesson 3 and 4 and 5 must be, I will dedicate to design pattern. Remember, in this lecture, I just talked about Singleton pattern, right? I just talked about Singleton pattern, but definitely, at least you should know gang of fours and as well as non-gang of fours, at least 5 or 6 patterns to be comfortable, right? So I'll be covering at least 10 patterns in this 2 or 3 lessons, right? No architect interview is complete without DDD and microservices, right? So I will not say 1 or 2 lectures, but must be 3 or 4 lectures which are dedicated to DDD and microservices, right? And also nowadays what is happening is, many of the architect interviews are asking scenario based questions. So those, like, they are not asking what is what and why. They will say here is a scenario and design it. So we'll try to go through some important scenario based questions if possible. If you guys can put down on the comments that what kind of scenario based questions have come to you guys, that will help me, right? We will look into UML document, we'll look into some questions around technical document and so on, and I have more other plans. Let me know what I should more add in this syllabus, right? Now, very quickly, right? Remember, I talked about the gift. Yeah, the gift, right? So here it is. The next lecture, that is the solid principle video, I'm giving it to you. But I'm giving it to you if you can help me to share this video, because I want that many people should share these videos. Many people should see this video, and they should get benefit from it, right? So if you can go to my LinkedIn profile, here it is, I'm flashing my LinkedIn profile. So if you can go to my LinkedIn profile and if you can share this video, right, the architecture interview question video, and if you can send me a mail at questpond@questpond.com, I will send you the solid principle video. The solid principle video is almost of 1 hour. I'm sure that you will enjoy it, right? For the rest of the videos, as I've said that I'm planning the other videos as well, that is design patterns and the DDD and microservices and so on. Those videos, you can either buy it from QuestPond, right? If you buy from QuestPond, I can give you support as well. Or else if you say, no, not from QuestPond, are you on Udemy? Yes, we are on Udemy as well. You can buy from us from Udemy as well. Third, you can buy from our YouTube channel itself. So inside the YouTube channel subscription, you can go ahead and you can pay the monthly subscription. And in that, the good thing is that you get access to everything, right, for that monthly thing, right? So you can go and access these videos from there, right? Now please note that I am still in the process of creating the videos, right? So please do ask at questpond@questpond.com, are the videos completed, so that we can tell you till what syllabus we have completed, right? So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Remember, just very quickly, every year 12th March is my birthday. 12th March I record such kind of videos and I put on my channel. So if you really think that you like this channel and you should get update of this contents, please go and hit the like button. Please go and hit that follow button, so that next time a video comes in, you are aware of it, right? So guys, happy learning, happy job hunting. I hope that you get a job. I hope that seniors out there, who are struggling, for getting a job, I hope that you land up in a good job, and I hope that you have a good life and good family. Happy learning, happy job hunting. Thank you.